This is the Q&A podcast with your host, Peter Slen. Thanks for joining us. Starting shortly is our conversation with ABC Chief Washington correspondent Jonathan Karl. His latest book is about the 2024 election and is titled Retribution. Our conversation begins in a moment. Congratulations on the greatest comeback in political history, Mr. President. That's what ABC's Jonathan Karl said to Donald Trump the morning after the 2024 election. In our wide-ranging conversation with the longtime ABC newsman, we talk about his book, Retribution, his on- and off-camera relationship with Donald Trump, his interviews with Hunter Biden and Steve Bannon, and his views on the legacy media. Our conversation with Jonathan Karl begins now.
Jonathan Karl, I want to start this conversation by reading from the first chapter of your new book, Retribution. Quote, I decided to make a quick call. It was 7:30 a.m. on November 6, 2024. Trump had won and won big. With Trump now heading back to the White House, I figured I would call, congratulating him on his victory. Thanks to American democracy, the man I had described as a threat to American democracy would soon be the 47th President of the United States. Hello. Trump's voice was hoarse. Mr. President-elect, it's Jonathan Karl. I just wanted to call to say congratulations. On what, Jonathan? He needed to hear me describe out loud what he had accomplished. On what, Jonathan? He said a second time. You tell me what, he demanded. On the greatest comeback victory in the history of American politics. Mr. Karl, that's quite a moment.
Yeah. And you have to keep in mind the context here is it's the morning after the election. Everybody's been up all night. I mean, you know what it's like on election night. I mean, we were broadcasting live on ABC until after 4 a.m. And then as soon as that ended, you know, I had to make my way down to the other studio where GMA is broadcast, another part of town, to be on Good Morning America. I had not slept, and I know Trump had not slept either. And I truly did not expect that he was going to pick up the phone. I mean, give me a break. But extraordinary. I mean, it was just it was an extraordinary moment. And for him to say, congratulations on what? Was just quite a moment. I felt like he I mean, obviously we knew what I was congratulating him for, right? But he wanted to hear me say it. He wanted me to say that he had won, and he had won big. I compare it in the book to, there's a great scene in Breaking Bad where the Walter White character, played by Bryan Cranston, is there in the desert meeting with some other, you know, drug dealers that he's vanquished. And he says to them, say my name. It was a say my name moment.
So the greatest comeback in American political history.
I mean, what could be close? Think about it. He's a guy who left the White House defeated and disgraced, obviously impeached twice, a pariah to his own party, to many in his own party, the leaders in his own party, when he left, somebody who had faced, been indicted in 4 different jurisdictions, somebody who had been convicted of a felony in New York, coming back and winning his party's nomination, and then winning the presidency, winning every one of the 7 battleground states. It was nothing if not the greatest comeback we've ever seen. I mean, what's one that could even come close? Nixon had quite a comeback because, you know, he had lost the governorship in California and then been elected in '68. But not even Nixon's comeback compares to this.
When did you describe President Trump as a threat to American democracy?
Well, I had written the book Betrayal, which was about the events of 2020 and early 2021, about Trump's efforts to overturn the presidential election and the events that culminated in the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. And the thrust of that was that he had tried to overturn American democracy. That, you know, but by definition, his activities, his actions were a threat to democracy. I also, you know, wrote a book about his exile in Mar-a-Lago after he left the White House. That went into that theme as well. So I had been pretty direct about that. And here he was. I mean, he had won, and it wasn't like his victory in 2016. Not only had he won the Electoral College, which is how you get elected president, of course, but he had won the popular vote, and by a considerable margin.
Mr. Karl, you are chief Washington correspondent for ABC News. How long have you been texting and calling the President of the United States on a regular basis?
Well, it's interesting. I've known him since 1994. I was a reporter for the New York Post. And
was he accessible to you then?
Incredibly accessible. And the first time I interviewed him, I was at the paper for a few months. I was in my 20s. I was totally unknown, and I reached out to the general number literally in the phone book for the Trump organization, and I asked for him, and I got a return call pretty quickly, and it ended up becoming a front page story in the New York Post, and that began a relationship. But I didn't call him directly in those days. I didn't call him directly when he was president the first time around. I would call an aide, I would call somebody, and he would be accessible. He would get back to me, or he was always very accessible, but I never actually called his phone directly until the very first time I ever did it was the Monday after the Butler assassination attempt. And I'd had his number for some time, but I always felt go through channels, and in this case, I was really horrified, like the world was, about what happened in Butler. And not only was I horrified by that, but I had this great sense of fear and foreboding that we could have real civil unrest in this country. Trump supporters lashing out in anger at the fact that somebody tried to kill Donald Trump. And I had seen what some people had said, kind of stoking that anger. J.D. Vance, if you remember, had put out a statement on X saying that, effectively blaming the assassination attempts on Democrats, saying they tried to impeach him, they tried this, now they tried to kill him. And I was in Milwaukee at the time where the convention was starting, about to start. And there was so much tension and so I called him thinking and leaving a voicemail message, just saying, I'm really horrified by what happened in Butler. I'm grateful that you're okay. Hoping that I would in some way contribute to a tamping down of the tension. And to my shock, he called me back a few hours later, just as we were about to go on the broadcast. And after that, I started calling him regularly.
Well, you're not alone, are you? A lot of reporters text or call him, don't they?
Yeah, it wasn't happening so much before, and you didn't see this much in the, I don't even know at all in the first term. Actually, if you really wanted to get Trump on the phone in the first term, one of the ways you could do it was to call the White House switchboard. This was and sometimes they would just connect and you'd get through to them. That wasn't something we did regularly, but that was something if you really, wanted to get through to them. But now, and I think that my call on after Butler was, I'm not going to say it was the first, but I think it was one of the first where a reporter called him, and then got some really. I talked to him for like almost 15 minutes on that Monday. The convention was about to start, and I went on air and I described the conversation and I quoted what he had said to me, and eventually. You saw more and more people do the same thing, and now, and now he's president, and it happens. And I've been much more. I don't call him much as president. It still seems to me to be kind of odd. There's got to be a real significant reason, but I'm telling you, he'll just president of the United States. First of all, the
very
president,
accessible, right?
Yes, very accessible, and the idea of the president of the United States even having a cell phone is a unique thing.
I remember during the Obama administration, there was a security issue about that.
With his BlackBerry. Remember, right. Obama wanted to have his BlackBerry, and they were like, no, you can't do that. And then they found a way to make the BlackBerry secure. But look, I know of specific instances, and there are probably many more that I don't know about, where Trump has been playing golf and has taken calls on his cell phone with foreign leaders. Again, usually a foreign leader call, you get everybody, you get your State Department people on, your national security people on, you're in the skiff, the secure area. I mean, Trump's like out there on the fourth hole, and it's like, here's Macron giving him a call.
Is it just President Trump, or is this the new norm?
I think it's just President Trump. I mean, I don't think there's ever going to be anybody, quite like him. I describe in the book, there were, I would hear occasionally from J.D. Vance once he was the running mate via text message. I didn't get in the habit of calling him. I don't think I ever, but occasionally I would text him, but that, I don't think that hasn't continued since he's actually become vice president. His numbers changed. I haven't heard of other, who knows, maybe some. But no, I think Trump is a unique figure, to say the least, Peter. Donald Trump is a unique figure in American history.
Are those records, could they be subpoenaed? Your texts, your phone calls to the president? Are those public record?
Under the Presidential Records Act, which we learned a heck of a lot about with the Hillary Clinton email issue, those weren't presidential records, but those were government records that were required to be preserved. Presidential records are required to be preserved as well. If you remember, in the first term, I think Maggie Haberman was the first to report this. But Trump got in the habit of, he would just tear up, he would get a memo, an official memo or whatever, and he would tear it up and throw it in the garbage. And there were people in the Trump White House who would go into the garbage and tape the memos up to ensure that they were preserved and sent on to the National Archives, because all presidential communication is supposed to be, preserved. So I would assume that would include text messages.
Well, Jonathan Karl, you said you've known him since 1994. We have a little bit of video of the president talking about you.
There's never been a person that's had more unfair publicity than me, and that's why your network paid me $15 million or $16 million, I believe. For you to stand there and act so innocent and ask me a question like that. But look, you paid a big price because you were dishonest, John. The reason I won that lawsuit was because you were dishonest. You were proven to be dishonest, and so you can't sit back and just say, oh, well, what do you think? Like you're some wonderful person. You're not a wonderful person. Frankly, you're a terrible reporter. You know it, and so do I. Okay. Here's what we're going to do.
Thank you. And he still takes your calls.
Yeah. So, that's not unusual.
Is that performative?
For sure. We've seen him lash out at many reporters. He's lashed out at me many times over the years. And then he's also in public settings, praised me as, I remember when he first introduced me to a guy named Ron DeSantis while he was running for governor. He said, Congressman DeSantis, this is the great Jonathan Karl of ABC News. So he'll praise, he'll attack. In this case, it was very interesting. Let me just bring you a little behind the scenes. So that's a White House pool spray, which C-SPAN viewers know very well what that is. The White House pool comes into the Oval Office, the president makes a statement, might take a couple questions, and then aides push the press out, say, okay, press, time to leave, and we leave. So as we were leaving, which was right after that, he took maybe one or two more, and we're told to leave, Trump motions to me to come towards the Resolute desk, and he does this kind of motion. He's like, we're okay, basically saying we're okay, don't worry about that. And I turned to him and I just said, that was tough. And he goes, oh, you were tough. No, you were tough. And it's like and then I continue to walk out, because again we're kind of being pushed out into the the door that goes towards the Rose Garden. He says, thank you, John. Thank you, Jonathan. If you go and you listen to the end of the poll feed, you hear those words. It's so it's like we're part of the show, and I don't doubt that sometimes he's been angry at reporters, angry at me, but he knows that is something that he thinks performs well to his core supporters.
Yeah, and in your book, you report some of the conversations that you've had, and they seem perfectly pleasant when it's a private conversation.
Yeah. And look, I've had a couple private conversations with him that were not perfectly pleasant. So that's when you can tell he's really upset. if he's upset behind the scenes. But one scene which it's a series of events that I describe in the book. And it just was so odd at the time. And I tried to go back and try to reconstruct what it was that caused this series of events. But it was an interview that I did with Tom Cotton on the ABC Sunday show this week. And it was a kind of a run-of-the-mill Sunday show interview. I mean, it was a little contentious. I pressed him on some stuff. He shot back. But it wasn't like, I mean, you've seen contentious interviews. This was not an overly contentious interview. And Trump, and it was late August. ABC was about to hold a debate, the one and only debate between Kamala Harris and Trump in early September. And Trump had agreed to it. Kamala Harris, it was all set. Everything was done. He put out a statement after the Sunday show aired and lambasted me in like really harsh terms. And said, ABC fake news, maybe I won't do the debate. Why should I do a debate, when they treat me like that, this terrible interview with Tom Cotton? And that's like a really big threat because like the debate is like a huge event. We're all like, and, I just kind of didn't react to it. You stay focused on the job. But then the next day, he has an event in Virginia and he's with the traveling press, and he goes after me again. This time not a statement on Truth Social, but to the cameras, and says more like terrible things about me, and like, I don't know if I'll do this debate. So it was pretty intense. I texted him after that second one, and I said, "Thank you for watching. I'm glad you saw it. I hope you also saw my interview with Bernie Sanders, who I also interviewed on the same show, which was actually, I think, more of a contentious interview than the interview with Tom Cotton." The point was, look, we asked tough questions of everybody. He didn't respond to the text. 2 days later, my phone rings. I'm in the middle of a meeting, planning the next Sunday show with the ABC staff, and it's Trump. And by the way, when he calls, his name pops up, so he doesn't block the caller ID, So I'm like, okay, guys, hang on.
It says Donald Trump?
Yeah. So he calls, and it's almost, and I'm like, what's this going to be? I mean, he's now attacked me in person. He's attacked me on this. I'm like, what the hell's going to go on? And he says, hey, how's it going? What are you up to? And it was almost like a friend checking in. How are things? What's happening? And I was like, well, we're getting ready. The CNN that night was going to be broadcasting the first interview with Kamala Harris as the presumptive as the nominee. And, so I said, we're just getting ready. And I was like, and he's like, you were pretty tough on our friend Tom Cotton, but that's okay. That's okay. And he held him. He did quite well. That's okay. And then he just kind of, how's the debate coming along? So now no more threats to the debate. He's like, what role are you going to be playing in the debate? I was like, well, David Muir and Lindsay Davis are going to be moderating. Martha Raddatz and I are going to be doing the post show and the pre-show, the pre-debate show and the post-debate show. It's like, okay, that's great. And then you got you have the nominee on the phone. So I'm like, by the way, I'd love to come down and do an interview. He's like, yeah, we should come. Give me a call after the debate. We'll bring you down to Mar-a-Lago and we'll do. His phrase was, we'll do some TV work. So it was like nothing had happened, and he was like my best friend again. I mean, so it goes hot and it goes cold, and I just ignore it and do the job.
And C-SPAN's Q&A podcast continues in a moment.
When he calls you out like that, Jonathan Karl, do you hear from ABC executives or do you hear from the American public?
Well, I will hear certainly from people on social media, and it can be a torrent of hate and threats, and it can be pretty bad. You don't know how much of it is real, how much of it is bots, what it is, but the reaction is instantaneous.
Have you ever worried for your security?
There have been times where, but the strange thing is yes, you have to be. And ABC has only been supportive throughout many such incidents. When I was president of the White House Correspondents Association, I had a meeting with Trump in the Oval Office shortly after 2 mass shootings in the country. One was in El Paso, the other was in Dayton. I don't know if you remember. They happened within I forget how many days, but they happened in close succession. And it was a real tense moment, like many tense moments in the country. And Trump had been lambasting the press, enemy of the people and all that. And I said to him, I was like, aren't you worried when you use words like that people are going to, some crazy person could take your words to heart? I mean, look what just happened in El Paso. And he, without missing a beat, he said to me, I hope people take my words to heart, because the fake news really is the enemy of the people, blah, blah, blah. And I thought it was almost like he didn't process what I was asking, which is a crazy person doing something like we had just seen in El Paso. So I don't think he processes that the words may be part of a show and he might get a good reaction, but they can be dangerous.
Well, the name of your book is Retribution. Let's go back to March of 2023, Waco, Texas.
Yeah.
In 2016, I declared, I am your voice. And now I say to you again tonight, I am your warrior. I am your justice. And I took a lot of heat for this one, but I only mean it in the proper way. For those who have been wronged and betrayed, of which there are many people out there that have been wronged and betrayed, I am your retribution. We will take care of it.
What do you think he meant by that?
Well, he first used the phrase earlier in the year in a speech at CPAC, where he was much more concise and really landed on it. In 2016, I said, I am in your voice. Now I say to you, I am your retribution. And I think that he was abundantly clear that he meant that if he gets elected president, he would get retribution on his enemies, telling his people they have come after me because their real target is you. That was the argument that he was making. Why do you think they've tried to put me in jail? Why do you think they've prosecuted me? Why do you think they've impeached me? Because their real target is you, and I'm the only thing that stands between you and them. I am your retribution. Now, I spoke at the time with Steve Bannon, who had a role in that CPAC speech in early 2023. And he kept referring to that speech as the come retribution speech. That's like a defining, he said, this is a defining moment for the Trump presidential campaign. And by the way, at the time, Ron DeSantis was still leading in some polls. This is early 2023. It was not a given that Trump was going to be the nominee again. His campaign had been off to a not great start. You remember the Republicans did really bad in November of 2022. A lot of people blamed Trump's interventions in a lot of those races. And now he had a new message, which was, I am your retribution. What was interesting is come retribution, and Bannon confirmed to me later this is exactly what he was referring to. Come retribution was the code word that the Confederate Secret Service used for the plot to either kidnap or assassinate Abraham Lincoln as retribution for what the South believed the North had inflicted upon the Confederacy. And I was like, what? I mean, and he said, oh yeah, no, but I mean, I'm not like saying it's like about assassinating anybody or it's about Confederacy, but it's about getting revenge. come retribution.
Steve Bannon plays a large role in your book.
Yeah.
Spent a lot of time with you. What's his current relationship with Donald Trump?
It's a complicated relationship. He's still very much an influence on Trump. He talks to Trump. He's not at the White House hardly at all. He has been there. He doesn't always, Trump does things that are very un-Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon opposed the airstrikes against Iran. Steve Bannon is not a fan of the intervention in Venezuela. Steve Bannon, would like to see Trump have a more populist approach to economic policy, raising taxes on the wealthy, taking a stronger anti-trust position against some of the big tech companies, which, by and large, the Trump administration has not done. But in terms of the overall, America first kind of theme, Steve Bannon is very much an architect of much of what the Trump presidency is.
And you visited him in prison?
I talked to him right before he went to prison and right after he got out. I tried to visit him in prison. He told me I would be able to see him. He made it clear once he was there. I mean, I went through intermediaries. He wasn't seeing anybody. In fact, he had no visitors for the 4 months he was in prison. And he took only one phone call, he told me, while he was in prison from somebody who wasn't his lawyer, talking about his legal case. He used his time to kind of communicate. He was communicating with Trump, I found out, while he was in prison, not via telephone. But Steve Bannon, the prisoners, this is the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury. It's a low security prison, but it's not one of the prison camps. So it's a place with the bars on the doors. It's a pretty tough place. It's not one of these, kind of country club prisons. But Bannon had access to computers. There were 4 computers, I think it was, in his cell block of 48 people. They could sign out for, I think it was 30-minute increments to use the computers. They were not connected to the internet. But he could send emails that then would be reviewed by the prison authorities and then mailed out. So it wasn't a direct thing. So what Bannon explained to me is he had a code word. He communicated with his staff on his War Room podcast, and he had a code word of when a message was to go to Trump or to Boris Epstein, Trump's aide, somebody else in his circle. So he was communicating. But I spoke at length with Bannon about that experience in prison. Became an excerpt from the book in The Atlantic. It is a fascinating story.
Remind us why he went to prison.
He went to prison because he was found guilty of contempt of Congress, because he refused to cooperate with the January 6th Special Select Committee, the Liz Cheney co-chaired committee on January 6th. So the fact that he went to prison for stiffing Liz Cheney and the January 6th committee made him a hero in Trump's world, and to use mob language here, a made man for Donald Trump. I mean, whatever disagreements they may have or not have, he's a guy that rather than rat on Trump, cooperate with the investigators, he was willing to go to prison for 4 months. One of the things I describe is he gets out of prison at 3 o'clock in the morning. And the first phone call he gets before the break of dawn is from Trump. Steve, my Steve, how are you? Trump knew that he went to prison essentially to protect Donald Trump. By the way, one of the stories that Bannon said to me, which I thought he was probably BSing, to be honest, was that he had befriended a guy named Vito in prison, a mob hitman, he said. This guy was tough. He had been in high security prison, been in prison for some 30 years, and he'd worked his way to Danbury, but he was this guy. And he describes how he became friends with this guy, Vito, mob hitman. I was like, okay, Steve. His name's Vito? Is it Carleone? What is it? I kept on asking him, so what's his last name? And because I wanted to get the background and confirm and all this stuff. And then after I'm talking to Steve for a while, he tells me Vito got released, and I helped him get out. First Step Act. Remember the Jared Kushner initiative that was passed with Democratic support, widespread Democratic support, signed by President Trump in the first term, prison reform, sentencing reform, and all that. He gets out. And Steve shows me a video of the guy getting released. And it's like a scene out of Sopranos. You see him come out through the razor wire of the prison, and he's dressed in a white Takamine tracksuit, beautiful white tennis shoes, and he's carrying like a black bag. His hair is perfect, and he comes up, and his friend is shooting the video of him coming out, and he gives his girlfriend a hug and says, "Let's get out of here." It's just like so I'm like, wow, so Steve, who is he? Now I want to talk to him. I really want to talk to him. And Steve kept on blowing me off. Bannon kept on blowing me off, not giving me his name. I eventually found out who it was. And Bannon was telling me exactly the truth. His name was Vito Guzzo. You could Google him now. He was a reputed Colombo family hitman who pled guilty in 1998. It was a big story. New York Times had a huge write-up on it, of 5 murders. Pled guilty to 5 murders just as his case was about to go to trial. Got a 38-year, I think it was, sentence, and was in fact released from Danbury.
Have you connected with Vito yet?
I haven't. I've tried, but I have not.
Hunter Biden plays a big role in your book as well. No on-the-record interviews with Kamala Harris or Joe Biden?
No.
Why?
In fact, I asked, as you can imagine, repeatedly for both of them. I asked for interviews. I requested interviews with Kamala Harris throughout the course of the campaign, and no dice. I mean, one thing I've said, and it sounds ridiculous when you think about it, but it's 100% true, as you can imagine. It was easier to get Donald Trump on the phone than it was to get like a deputy assistant spokesperson at the Harris campaign. It was easier to get Trump on the phone. And Harris was very caught. Towards the end, she started doing more interviews of the campaign. But I think one of the things, which I talk about in the campaign, her 107 days, is she was so cautious and did so few interviews during the first part of that 107 days that every time she did one, she was, first of all, a little out of practice, and also the attention and the significance of each interview was so great. Imagine if she'd been doing like John McCain style in 2000, you get your message out more, you get more coverage, you get more comfortable, and yeah, sure, you might step on your message every once in a while, but but she did not do that. Hunter Biden, who I did a lot of on the record interviews, I spent time with him after his father dropped out. I talked to him before his father dropped out, but I did a big interview with him in October of 2024. So his father is out, Harris is the nominee, and we have a wide-ranging conversation that lasts for more than a couple hours. And it was fascinating because Hunter Biden is a very controversial figure, but he was also arguably, in the last part of the Biden campaign, his father's closest advisor. I mean, he talked to his father every single day. And as Biden became more and more insular and he was closed off, from some of his top aides, I describe in detail. I'm very proud of the reporting on Biden here because I think it is the definitive account of his decision to drop out of the race and what happened, and also his interactions with Trump, by the way, because I had extraordinary access. Some of that was Hunter Biden, but extraordinary access to the very few people who were around Joe Biden. And, Hunter, there was a meeting where Biden makes the decision to finally drop out of the race. And I describe who is there. And it's a couple of the really close longtime aides, Donnellan, Ricchetti, And Hunter is on over the phone. But you know who wasn't there? Is his chief of staff. The White House chief of staff not only wasn't there, wasn't like clued into what the meeting was about, but Hunter is there. So my point is, press secretary is not there, communications campaign manager is not there, none of that. But Hunter is. And so Hunter had real insight into what was going on and was quite candid in his conversations with me.
Did the national press, were they delinquent in covering Joe Biden?
I think that, look, first of all, you've known me a long time. One thing I hate is kind of like, get on the couch and do like press criticism and what is the, I use the phrase national press. Others use the media. Was the media too? I mean, what is the national press and what is the media at this point? I mean, it's such a, there are so many different news organizations and quasi-news organizations, and are we talking about the New York Times? Are we talking about the networks? Are we talking about Axios and Politico? Are we talking about the My Pillow network? What are we talking about? I mean, what is the? But anyway, putting that aside, I don't think that there was a big cover-up of Joe Biden's health, because I believe it was all out there for the world to see. And look, you had people calling for him not to run again way before that debate happened. I mean, go back to like David Ignatius had a column, I think it was in beginning of September 2023. So almost 2 years before that debate, saying you've been David Ignatius being a Washington Post columnist, but somebody who was quite favorable to the Biden presidency, and saying, look, you've done great things, but now's the time to move on. I mean, people saw, and it's not like Biden was like, much worse behind closed doors. I mean, people saw what. I mean, when he came out to comment on the Hur report, which got widespread coverage, obviously, the Hur report, which was about his use of classified documents, and referred to him,
well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory.
Yeah. And Biden comes out to respond to that, and he refers to he's asked a question about Gaza, and he refers to the president of Mexico when he means the president of Egypt. I mean, this is at a moment where he's pushing back at the notion that he's elderly and has a poor memory. So, I mean, people saw that he had aged significantly. People saw that he had issues with his memory and all that. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure some people should have done more, but.
How'd you get into this business?
I have just loved news since I was in probably 5th grade. I remember that's when I discovered.
Where were you raised?
I was raised, born in Connecticut. When I was in 5th grade, I started in Connecticut and then moved to South Dakota because my mom and my stepfather were doing an oral history project that they had kind of randomly pursued on the people who were responsible for building Mount Rushmore. They worked with a sculptor who was Gutzon Borglum. There were some 300, mostly miners, who did the blasting of the stone and all that. And they wanted to go around and try to find as many of they could that were still alive, without the benefit of like Google and like looking around. But to really go, they took out advertisements in the newspapers, and we went around and interviewed. And I think that was a big moment in my life where I was like fascinated. I could see history kind of unfold, and I sat in on those interviews, and that was probably the beginning. But I also discovered like the New York Times op-ed page, which is kind of and Reagan, when Reagan was president and I was still in grade school, and there were the arms control negotiations with the Soviets. I was just like fascinated by it. And then I did my high school yearbook. My junior high school yearbook. We didn't have a newspaper. I started my own newspaper in high school, that was the highlight of my career. It was called Communique. Definitely the best thing I ever did. I mean, it was like such a blast my senior year. So I've been doing this forever, and
And C-SPAN's Q&A podcast continues in a moment.
What does a chief Washington correspondent do?
Well, I co-anchor our Sunday show, so that's a big part of it. Whenever there are the big special reports, election night or a major event or catastrophe, I'll be on our live special report, and it means I can get tasked to do just about anything that happens in Washington. So the phone can ring for anything.
Well, speaking of which, you did an interview with somebody else. We just want to show a portion of that. This is a recent interview.
At the end of Trump's final State of the Union address, Pelosi proceeded to rip up the text of his speech.
I didn't intend to go to speech to tear it up, but the first part of it, I tore a page because he was lying, and then the next page, and then the next page, and I thought it was a manifesto of lies all throughout. So I better just tear up the whole speech. Now, the speeches are on strong paper. So you have to do it a few times to get it done. But I had no intention of doing it. I thought my staff was going to die.
What's her legacy in this town?
First of all,
besides first woman speaker,
and the line that will be, to describe her anywhere as the most powerful woman in the history of American politics. I mean, there's just no doubt. And became speaker twice. Was responsible for passing some of the most ambitious and far-reaching pieces of legislation of our lifetimes. The Affordable Care Act, the Wall Street reform, all that under Biden, under Obama, the huge bills, the infrastructure bill, the major initiatives that happened under Biden. She's the one that helped craft those things and ensured that they passed. She's also a very divisive figure, somebody who became a prime target for Republicans, a prime target for Donald Trump. You can go back to, campaigns, 2 decades ago and more where, Republicans running against whatever House member it was, whatever Democrat it was, Pelosi would be in the ad, San Francisco liberal, don't give her the power. So, she's a formidable figure, beloved by many and detested by many others.
But from day one of the Trump campaign, she was pretty strong in her negative views about Donald Trump. Is that part of the retribution?
Yeah, I mean, look, Pelosi was in some ways the prime antagonist of Donald Trump in that first term. And some of those images are just iconic. I mean, there's the tearing up the speech, obviously, but there's that moment where she went in for a meeting in the cabinet room and she ended up walking out. And there's that photograph of her standing up with almost all men in the shot, Trump across the table. And she's standing up and she's doing this. And the Trump White House put it out to say unhinged Nancy, crazy Nancy, whatever. And she embraced that picture and made it her profile on social media. She told me that photograph is the thing, people ask her to sign stuff all the time, that's the single most requested signature is on a photograph of that photograph. And there's the image of her walking out of the White House with that coat and the glasses but she faced Trump down. Now ultimately, Trump lost in 2020 and then came back. That's part of her legacy too. She also played a very key role, one that she likes to downplay, but in the effort to convince Biden to get out of the race.
John Karl, this is your third Trump book.
Fourth.
Tired of winning, Donald Trump at the end of the GOP, front row at the Trump show, Retribution.
And Betrayal.
Betrayal.
Final act of the Trump show.
You report in this one, is your father still a fan of Donald Trump?
Yeah, my father died in late 2017, but as I talk about, he was a Trump supporter, and it was just when I was looking into Corey Comparator, who was killed in Butler, I just kept on seeing my father. I mean, like, Corey was a firefighter. My dad was a lifelong volunteer fireman. Corey loved cars and collected cars and was really meticulous about taking care of them. So was my dad. And they both had this kind of like, you know, they were attracted to the guy.
Why did you use Evan Vucci's AP photo for the cover?
Because I think it's the defining photograph of the campaign. Now, some people have reacted some people really like that because that is the moment, you know. But some people that were upset that I used that photograph. Some people think that Butler was somehow staged. I mean, I know Evan Vucci, you know Evan Vucci. He took that photograph. It was not staged. The shots were fired. Corey is dead as a result of the thing. It was not a staged event. Now, maybe you can question whether or not the bullet hit his ear or what, you know, was he hurt when he went down? Whatever. If you want to get down that, that's fine. But those shots were fired. One person is dead. 2 other people face serious life-altering injuries. And I just thought that photograph defined Trump's comeback.
Did you talk to him about those moments?
Yes,
did you
I
talk
did.
to President Trump?
Yes, I did. And I talked to him.
Did he walk you through that?
Yes. And he, in the days right after it happened, seemed completely like stunned by it still, like how close that bullet came. Because again, whatever you think the ear injury was or wasn't, that bullet, you know, an inch this way, you know, he's hit in the head and he's dead. And he was fully aware of that. And this is not a guy that has spent much time thinking about his own mortality. You know, it really isn't. And you saw a change in him that didn't last very long. But you definitely, in those initial days, you know, he did turn the temperature down when many other people around him were ready to crank it up.
And you walk through in Retribution what Butler was like on July 13th, 2024, and the security or the lack of security as well.
I tried to, again, there are a few points in this book where I really felt like I mean, the whole thing is I'm writing for history. This was the most extraordinary campaign that we've ever witnessed. I mean, whatever you think of the end result of this campaign was one for the ages. You know, the Shakespearean drama surrounding Joe Biden, Kamala Harris's meteoric rise and fall, Donald Trump's voyage from being a convicted felon to being arguably the most valuable, most powerful president of our lifetime. I mean, this is a campaign for the ages. And I spent considerable time, like really just months of research just on this alone, on Butler, and trying to understand everything about it. And there was both lax security in some respects and higher security that we had ever seen. So let me explain that. Lily Ipsa was the ABC embed reporter recounted coming into Butler that morning. They always get there earlier. They got to set up. And she walks in with somebody else from another network. And she said it was like one of the first and only rallies she ever had where the dogs didn't sniff her bags. And where they didn't make her turn her computer on. You know, these kind of like basic things. It was like the quickest, you know, they had to go through the mags and go through through the x-ray machine, but it was like, wow, I've never seen this. They're so chill. That was what she said to her colleague. It's so chill. I don't know, it's so chill. So clearly there was something that was like, it was not heavily secure. But this is a really important point that I found out in the course of reporting for this book. It was the first rally of a presidential candidate who was not a sitting president, that had Secret Service counter snipers. that is something that is part of the presidential package, as the Secret Service lingo would go. You have the counters. You see them when you go to presidential events; they're up there. But for a nominee, they don't have the same security package they hadn't that the sitting president has. So why were there counter snipers? And by the way, the fact that there were counter snipers is really important, because when Crooks takes his shots, one of the counter snipers swings around and in a single shot kills him. He could have gotten more shots off. More people would have been dead. Maybe Trump, maybe not. Who knows? But he was up on that roof. The cop who tried to get him had fallen off. He could have kept on shooting. So why were the counter snipers there? They were there because the Secret Service had picked up threats, not from a guy named Crooks, not something specific to Butler, but they had picked up intelligence that the government of Iran wanted to assassinate Trump and was actively pursuing it. So they ramped up, they added in this extra layer. So as somebody very close to Trump who worked on that campaign and worked in a senior role in the White House said to me, the Iranians saved Trump, might have saved Donald Trump's life. The fact that they were trying to kill him and the Secret Service found out about that and added in this counter sniper enabled them to take out Crooks. Now, there is no evidence whatsoever that Crooks was part of a Iranian plot or anything like that. But, so extraordinary. The other thing is I described, because I got access to the testimony of the agents that were with Trump. It was testimony that was out there, but it had not been, people didn't know about it. It was the congressional, the special committee they set up to look into it. They released a report which got some attention, and then later they just kind of quietly put out these full transcripts. And then I was able to discern who, because they blocked out the names, I was able to discern who they were. And, when Trump, that moment in Vucci's photograph, when he, the Secret Service jumps on him, brings him down, which is their protocol. And then they have to keep him low and rush him into the armored SUV as soon as they're clear that there's not more shots coming. But they don't know if there's another gunman. They know one gunman's been taken out, but they don't know if there's not. Is there, how big is this plot? And so when Trump, comes up to do his fight, they're trying to keep him down. Like, no, we got, and he pushed past his own detail to do that. And that was, as one of the men, the guy in the back with the glasses, testified, that was a total violation of all their protocol to allow him to come up. And it was also, a defining moment in Trump's life, as seen in that photograph.
John Karl, from your book, Retribution, quote, admitting defeat is not the Trump way.
I mean, that is certainly the case. Donald Trump operates in a way that admitting defeat or showing any weakness whatsoever just cannot happen. I mean, look at his refusal to acknowledge defeat in 2020. And I do believe, he may now believe he won. I don't know, but he certainly had all the information at his fingertips to show that he lost that race. But here's the key. The Trump's power comes from the perception that he is the ultimate winner, that he is the guy that triumphs. He's the biggest, the wealthiest, the strongest. This is why he would fight with Forbes over how they would assess his wealth, to try to argue he was worth more money than he actually was, because he convinces people, I am ultimately successful. You follow me, you'll be successful too. So if he admits defeat, there's a fear in the back of his head that not only has he now lost, but all those people that have been so fervently supporting him have been supporting him because he's a winner. Maybe they'll go away. So no, admitting defeat is something you'll never see Donald Trump do.
What's your take on Susie Wiles' interview with Vanity Fair?
You know, it was interesting because Susie Wiles had talked to the author like some dozen times over the course of a long time. I think if you really look at every quote in there from Susie Wiles, there's not even a hint of anything remotely critical of Donald Trump. She was candid in some of what she said. She hardly ever talks on the record at all.
Have you ever talked to her?
I've talked to her many times, but never on the record. I mean, never done an interview with her. I'd love to have her. It would be great to bring her on here. So I think that I think that actually what was more kind of shocking to me in that story was that they cooperated at all with a story that wasn't about Trump. It was really about them. I mean, the staff, not just Susie Wiles, all of them. The fact that the photographer came in and had what must have been, a long access to the West Wing for those staged and set up photographs, which didn't work out well for them. I suspect we won't be seeing that happen again. But Susie Wiles is a total loyalist to Donald Trump, and she's served him, and he's never had a more effective chief of staff. He's had chief of staff who tried to steer him. She doesn't do that, but she's not going to interfere with what he wants to do. She's not going to push back strong on stuff. She will push back occasionally on some things, lightly, and then if Trump wants to go in the other direction, she's there to serve the president.
What are Steve Bannon and Hunter Biden, two of your sources for Retribution, doing today?
Hunter has spent a great deal of time actually out of the country. I think really wanted to unplug. I probably shouldn't say exactly where he is, but it's far away. He's been back and forth, but he's trying to get his life back together. He's got a young son. He's got a
sober, as far as you know.
Yes, as far as absolutely, yeah. I still will reach out to him occasionally and check on him, and see what he is up to, and still very much the guardian of his father's legacy now. Steve Bannon is broadcasting, I guess not only live streaming 4 hours a day, 6 days a week, the War Room, which is the kind of, the real center of the activist MAGA right. And it's got a pretty significant viewership. And he's, talking a lot about how Trump should run for a third term.
Jonathan Karl. The book is called Retribution, Donald Trump and the Campaign That Changed America. And as you quote the president saying, this is going to be great television. I will say that. We appreciate your time.
Peter, thank you. Great to catch up with you.
Next week on the Q&A podcast, our guest is Nicholas Boggs, who spent over 20 years writing a 700-page biography of writer James Baldwin.